Dear friends, I'm making this video today because I've heard Biden makes a statement or making a statement uh, that if Biden, sent troops to evacuate Americans from Ukraine, it will cause world war. I find different evidence to that. I have memory of certain events and certain patterns in international power landscape that indicates otherwise. First of all, the rule of thumb is the leadership of the United States or the establishment in the United States, ever since JFK, rest in peace, and RFK, rest in peace, has been, in fact, a friend of the communist regime in Russia, or the Soviet Union for that matter. And when the Soviets were destroyed in Afghanistan and the Soviet Union dissolved and deconstructed, and which caused the leadership of communism to withdraw from countries like East Germany and other places as well. However, the West brought it back to life. Let's put it this way. First of all, I'm going to mention to you the pattern. There is a pattern, say, that anyone can see and anyone can detect. And never mind the words or statements or warmongering or sanctions or anything that is meant to deceive the average citizen of either Europe or America or the Middle East or anywhere else. If you detect the pattern in the Middle East, you would see that United States government is working with Russia and Iran on spreading the hegemony of Iran over the Middle East. They are systematically removing any Sunni Islam effect in the area or government or influence in the area, and given Iran a role of the area as well as Russia. And these are facts on the ground. If you look at United States entering Iraq, removing Saddam Hussein, and bringing Iran in, that is very, very obvious. And this could be reasoned or thought of as failure of the US policy or administration in acting to protect its interests in the Middle East. That's not the case, folks. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Iran by itself, the supposed revolution of Khomeini, really never went anywhere. First, they tried to invade the Middle East, take the Middle East on their own, but the Iran-Iraq war basically put a stop to that and caused a lot of issues in the Iranian society that Iran itself cannot fight such a war any longer because the people were tired of that war. They were disenchanted with the revolution, and now they are against the revolution for that matter. And in 2009, they rose up in demonstrations, and the regime in Iran shot people in there, including a woman called Nada or Neda. And we know the story. However, the United States came in after Iraq defeated Iran in the war, removed Saddam Hussein and the Sunnis, brought the Shiites, who are minority in Iraq, into power, and then spread the hegemony of Iran over the country. Later on, it was supposed to work in Syria in 2011 that a false flag operations or demonstrations would lead to purge in the population. However, the army defected, and that started basically the war in Syria. However, in United States and Russia came in and cooperated in Syria as much as the United States withdrawing from area that it has dominated to allow Russian forces and Iranian forces and Syrian regime forces to come and take over. And this is very obvious, folks. Now notice in Iraq, when United States came into Iraq, Russia produced no support, no opposition at all, showed no opposition to whatever United States is doing in the Middle East. So as you can see, there's a pattern of withdrawal and abdication of areas of power in areas where Sunnis have influence have diminished or made refugees and so on. And that is in cooperation with Iran's regime and Russia's regime as well. So that also extends during the Obama time into Ukraine as well. As you understand, as you recall, Obama helped Putin, or how did he help Putin seize Crimea and areas east of Ukraine? Simply by looking the other way and making sure that nobody intervened from the United States side. Now, if you recall, in the olden days, when it was a Cold War, everyone watched everyone else, and they basically rose to the occasion and stepped up to the plate to make sure that the other side didn't expand or move its influence inside the other's sphere of influence. We remember JFK and everyone else fighting against the Soviet Union. It was the Cold War. Now, some may protest and say, well, the Cold War is over. The Cold War is not over. The Cold War is raging, and the Cold War is moving with steadily rising and becoming hotter day by day, to the degree that that Putin basically almost seized the White House. What do I mean by seized the White House when you in your mind think, well, look, the White House is already in the hands of the Putins, meaning really Israel, right? So what difference would it make? Because it will be officially made a dictatorship rather than having to manipulate, always to have to manipulate the law and the Constitution and so on, and bend the Constitution and skew and screw and so on and so forth. If and when Trump took over the White House in January 6th, he would have, the first act of his would be to shear off the Constitution or disable the Constitution, nullify the Constitution, and he will begin to rule by a decree. Basically dictatorship. We're talking Lenin and Stalin here, taking over. The two brothers, or Hitler, or there are examples like the Assads of Syria, like Nasser of Egypt, like Castro of Cuba, and so on. South America, Chile, and Pinochet in Chile, and so on, so it's very much the same. That was meant for the United States in January 6th, and those people who born and shouldered the revolution of Trump in the United States would be the first one to suffer and be eliminated. That happened before in Germany, it happened in Russia, and wherever Russia took over, it happened in China, it happened in South America, it happened in the Middle East, it happened everywhere else. As you can see, there is a pattern for United States abdicating or withdrawing or vacating power areas and power positions to either Russia or to Iran. That's very obvious. I need not provide you any proof to that. Take for example, when Iraq started building Oziraq, which is a nuclear reactor in Iraq, Israel didn't wait, and Israel basically sent airplanes and destroyed the reactor before it became functional. Now, why is it that they're not doing the same thing with Iran? They didn't do the same thing with Iran is beyond me, but it's not beyond me, it's not beyond you. It's because Israel is building the nuclear capability of Iran. Now, here's a fact that will surprise you. The airplanes that took off, and the F-16s and so on, one of the airplanes was piloted by an Israeli pilot who got killed in the shuttle disaster during the George W. Bush tenure in the White House. These airplanes, those F-16s that attacked the Iraq in Baghdad, were flown from Iran, and I do believe they went back to Iran, landed back in Iran, and then from there they made their way back into Israel either somehow. I am not 100% sure of this, but 99% sure of this. They didn't want to risk any possibility of them being seen entering the airspace of Iraq from the west or southwest or anywhere, or Turkey or anywhere else. But they flew from most likely Iran, and they destroyed the reactor in Iraq and went back to Iran. That said, let's go back to the proven fact about the tripod of Israel. The tripod of Israel is really the Russian regime after it was revived after the 1990, after their failure in Afghanistan, and which caused the failure of the Soviet Union, and Iran's regime, as well as the Chinese regime. Now, this is the main tripod of Israel in its what's called, as heralded by George H. Bush, the father, as the New World Order, meaningly Israel ruling, because George H. Bush family is Jewish by religion, by blood. That's why he went to the Middle East. That's why he attacked Iraq, in Kuwait, and it was all to allow Iran to win back, again, to win Iraq again after they failed in the 9 years war against Iraq. So that's the tripod of Israel. Now, what is the proof on China? It's because the United States manufacturing and patent treasures and some of knowledge has been completely transferred to China. And now if you go to anywhere, to any store in the United States and look on the shelves, even every manufactured item, you would see that it's made in China. Even if you go to the food store and you want to buy garlic or ginger or whatever it is, you would see it's product of China. So they're basically, that tripod of Israel is being revived by the establishment in the United States, which is dominated by Israel after they decapitated the government of the United States by killing JFK and RFK. Not that they didn't own it before, but it was sparse before, let's put it this way. So that's what it is. And now the United States and Western Europe, for that matter, has been in the process of being gutted completely, and its goodness and its genius and its products of ingenuity in manufacturing and science, all that has been transferred to China, Russia, and Iran as well. Iran is on the lower end because Iran is mainly fighting a constant ground war, so to speak, to clean up the Middle East from the vast majority of Sunnis for the establishment of Greater Israel, which will not happen. So that's what it is, folks. Now, the consistent behavior of Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden towards Chinese regime and Russian regime and Iran's regime is not questionable. Those who are in politics of you will understand that, will know that, because they've been observing the situation and can easily predict dissect the American position and the American policy and behavior in these wars and so on, and see that the United States is intentionally being withdrawn and retreated by its own leaders, by its own establishment, to allow for those new regimes to rise and occupy the grounds, for example, the grounds of contention. China, for example, United States is abdicating and evacuating from Africa economically and politically and everything else, and allowing China to come in. But China has a problem, big problem in that case, similar to that of Iran, because Iran was unable to win a war against Iraq. Later on, they faltered in Syria. However, Russia came in to rescue them. And even when Russia came in conventionally, they were defeated. So they resorted to three different means. One is mass murder of population by way of sarin gas and bunker busters and so on. and then by allowing some offshoot elements of Alawites and Shiites and so on, led by Israel, to infiltrate the ranks of the population and the original Syrian army. So these are three methods by which they destroyed Syria, really. They had no such intention. All their intention is to peacefully purge the population and destroy it and make it leave. However, the population rose against them and defended itself, and that's what happened. So when Russia came into Syria, Russia came in for two reasons. One is to allow Iran to capture the country, similar to the United States going into Iraq to enable Iran to capture the country. And then, of course, Russia will have its bases there. But don't make mistake of the alliance between Russia and Iran and China and every other. They have smaller hairs or satellites. This gigantic tripod, they have smaller hairs, like protruding from the legs. Those tripods that's like the Syrian regime, Hezbollah, and some Gulf regimes, and Egypt and Jordan and Turkey and so on and so forth. But they're all surrounding those tripods, and there's that very small creature sitting on top of the tripod called Israel, standing up there and pulling the tethers or the reins, and then steering this gigantic tripod into mass murder and political mayhem and financial theft of the world economy and so on. So to say USA is in conflict with Russia over Ukraine, even with Biden, you may think Trump is different than Biden. Think again, after JFK and RFK, the government is really one. And although they try to pretend that there is conflict and political contention and between Republicans and Democrats, that's not true. That's not the case. They're all one and the same. And if you look at Biden and his statements and his actions toward Russia and Ukraine, if you ask yourself, why wouldn't he do any otherwise if Russia invades Ukraine? What will he do elsewhere? If Russia after Ukraine threatens Poland or threatens the Baltics or East Germany? And make no mistake, the concept of this tripod is really to do total dominance of Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, and Africa too. Of course, Africa, there is very little interest, big interest in Africa, but little interest in its development. However, big interest is to dominate it, and that has been achieved. Those smaller tripods, those smaller legs, such as the rule in Kenya and in Ethiopia and here and there, these are all loyal to Israel, put there by Israel, and they will not allow them to develop or become anything of significance, forces of significance, or independent, or anything else. Their only reason is really to drive Islam out of the African continent. Their only purpose being created there as being falashas, FALSHAS, falashas or falasha, is really to fight against the existence of Islam in the African continent and basically evict it. When I say Islam, I mean Sunnism. Anything else is really not Islam. So that said, so there's a consistency in what I'm saying. If you notice, Putin has, without qualms, without any hesitation, challenged the United States on every turn, whether it's in Syria or anywhere else. But for some reason, if you look closely, the United States establishment government, whether it is Trump, whether it is Biden, whether it's Obama or Bush's, they could care less about what Putin is doing and saying. When you expect them to actually counter the challenge, or if there is no Cold War, there is still geopolitical animosity between the two, and the United States should look for its own interest wherever it is. And if someone like Putin or like China or Chinese regime or Iran's regime come to challenge the authority of the United States or their sphere of influence, or have incursions in their like their space, they should rise to the occasion. But it seems to me like while Putin and Iran and China are very aggressive against the United States with its establishment is consistent about sitting back, relaxing, and watching them take over. As a matter of fact, there is complicity, if you will. I'll remind you, George W. Bush needed to give China some electronics, espionage, those airplanes like AWACS, a small one. So they sent an airplane which supposedly collided with a Chinese fighter jet, and then it was forced to land in Taiwan or Hong Kong or somewhere else. And then the Chinese authorities came and basically took all the secrets from it. And instead of fighting the Chinese regime and saying that their pilot actually collided with the airplane intentionally because he came very close to it, George W. Bush sends an apology, a letter of apology to the Chinese regime. And within it, he apologizes from the widow of the pilot who died in the collision, in the crash, and so on. Later on, if you recall, Obama going to Beijing and then bowing down before the Chinese premier, Xi Jinping. I'm not making this up. You guys can go, and you have a record, you can go ahead and check it. That was not an accident. That was not a dumb person who's the president of the United States acting erroneously. That was very much intentional. It was a gesture to show the world that the United States is bowing to China. The United States will not bow to China if you take anybody on the streets or in universities or schools, those engineers, those pilots, those city hall people, those officers, police officers, their citizens here and there. They will tell you that before they bow down to China or bow down to Russia or Iran or anybody else for that matter, hell will freeze over. I have actually read this before when during early 80s, I think, when something happened between Russia or the Soviet Union back then, and the United States and a low-rank local official or somebody who actually was reported in the papers, he said, and the Soviet Union demanded an apology, and he said, this official said, United States will apologize from the Soviet Union or Russia when hell freezes over. That's how I remember that word actually, and that term, and I used it now. So you can see that the United States intentionally, with its current leadership, shrinking to allow the rise of Chinese regime, of Iran's regime, of Russia's regime, which are the main tripod of Israel, and then below them there are smaller tentacles here and there, similar to like say in South America or in Europe for that matter, and in Africa and in the Middle East and here and there. And it seems to me like they have no mercy. Basically, they cannot achieve it on their own by way of conventional military campaigns. They cannot achieve their purpose, so they resort to what they know best is basically what I call the method of the Mongols, mass murder of civilians and destruction of their science and properties and so on and so forth. And believe it or not, I said it before, the Mongol movement, as well as the communist movement, as well as the Nazism, as well as Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the Iran's revolution, as well as the Cuban communist and Chinese revolution, they're all made by the same Putin's basic and simple. And that's what it is. I mean, you could see the consistency of the behavior of the US establishment in moving backward and allowing those new regimes to move in. Not that they're unable to do so or counter the threat, whether in Europe or here. No, no, no. So that's why I'm telling you, Ukrainians, don't expect the United States to come to your aid. Now, they gave you some missiles, right? Those missiles, yes, they will kill some Russians, like destroy tanks and shoot down some airplanes and so on, but not enough to inflict severe damage on the Russian forces as to stop them in their tracks. And they don't care. So the Russian regime, the Iran's regime, and the Chinese regime, they don't care about losing conscripts. Their main purpose is to allow for Israel to rule. Whatever else, whether you're a sympathizer or a loyal or opponent or whoever you are, they don't care. They will kill you. They do that in Syria, as a matter of fact, as you can clearly see. The Shiites of Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan are in Syria, making sure that the rule of Israel, which is really who is really behind the Assad regime, is enabled, is established. They kill them between now and then. They send air raids and they kill them, and all that is really to distract people. These people are in the those Putins are in the murder business. You know, that's how they survived along these years. And from what I'm seeing lately, I don't think they're going to change nature and become brave, courageous all of a sudden, and then go fight on their own. They will use these methods as long as they exist. They never change, never will. Their nature is diminishing, in fact, and causing them to become deadlier and bloodthirsty, more and more psychotic, and so on. So that's the fact about the wars in the Middle East, and then how United States regime or establishment is shrinking its country, is gutting its country for decades now, and transferring that into what is called the Israeli order, and that's China, Iran, and Russian regime. And there are, of course, other tentacles, like I said. For example, in Turkey, Turkey will not become a military power. No, they will not allow it to do so because it has a very large Sunni population. And the large Sunni population, or any Sunni population, is really the target of Israel anywhere in the world. But it will be the government there, or the establishment there, it will continue to be enabled by Israel to run the country and make sure that nothing serious comes out of that country. In Germany as well, I am sorry to say, Germany has actually fallen under the rule of Israel ever since World War II. And they are so much, the grasp of Israel over Germany is so strong that it's, to get rid of it cannot be done by conventional means, period. So like you said, the second point, like I said, the second point is while Putin is being aggressive toward the United States, or Iran is being aggressive toward the United States, or China is being aggressive toward the United States, instead of countering this threat, or tit for tat, if you will, instead of its intentionally shrinking and pulling back. Now, I want to remind you, you may say that if the US establishment, for example, under Trump or Biden or Obama or anybody, or Bush's, or anybody for that matter, supposedly they want to counter the threat of Russia, that it will bring back the Cold War, and then the threat of a nuclear war becomes a reality or a possibility. The answer is no. I'm going to remind you with an incident that happened during a certain president of the United States, the only president after JFK, which I'm a little bit confused about. Meaning, I don't know what he is. I know what his wife is, but I don't know what he is really. And it seems to me like I am 99% wrong about him. Yeah, what's his name? Let me scratch my head. Clinton. Oh, yeah. What's his first name? Bill. You know, he looks like this, like big German, tall German English guy. I don't know. All kind of stuff comes in him. You know, like Clinton. Oh, Clinton. Yeah, yeah. So why is he different? I don't know about him, but his behavior toward Russia is different from all the presidents after JFK. Here's the example. When this Bill Clinton was a president of the United States, the oil embargo was still effective against Iraq during the time of Saddam Hussein. right? And then Putin was a president back then, was a president. But then if you recall, Putin was a president, but due to the constitution in Russia, he had to leave after 2 terms or 3 terms or whatever. And then he brought a puppet of his called Medvedev, right? Medvedev. And then put him as a president. And later on, he amended the constitution and came back into the Kremlin, and he's been there ever since. Well, now I believe he's dead, but due to that intestinal cancer that he had, I don't know, a year ago or so. But nonetheless, and I believe that the one who's running the country now is like quite few. One is Lavrov, and he's got like 2-3 partners. But nonetheless, we see him by Photoshop on TV and so on, and let's say that he is. So he came back again and became a president. But nonetheless, during the time when Clinton was president and the first stint of Putin being president in Russia, he violated the oil embargo on Iraq and then sent one of his tankers or somebody's tanker and filled with oil from Iraq and then came back to Russia. However, this cowboy here, this Bill Clinton here, sent the Navy, intercepted that ship, and boarded it and confiscated it. Oh man, like, what's with this guy? You know, like, what's his name? From Hope, Arkansas. I still remember driving across the US and there's like Hope. Oh, and they're proud to call this Bill Clinton their son, right? He put that score on Putin right there and then. And Putin didn't squeal. You remember? I remember. Putin, the one who's acting tough now, you know, or back then and kills civilians, whether it's in Chechnya, Grozny, or whether it is in Syria, and whether it is anywhere else, the man is just basically bloodletting, you know, like that's his main instrument. He has nothing else going for him, really. So if you recall, he didn't squeal. So you may think that if the United States government now countered Putin, the threat of nuclear war would be resurrected again and Cold War. No, I assure you. And Clinton proved it to you that Putin will not do that. And Putin will heed a strong US leadership. Anyways, that's Clinton. Now, Clinton didn't survive the retaliation. So Clinton, this guy Clinton, right? So Clinton seized the ship right under the nose of Putin. He didn't do shit, right? How does Putin retaliate against him? I think, that's what I think. He retaliated against him by Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky, 2 Israeli Mossad agents. Under the request of Putin, he sent them to him. And while on the first one, Jones didn't, you know, but it was clear. On the second one, I think he tripped Clinton and caused him some serious damage. You see the difference between the two methods? The difference between the two methods? It's very obvious to me. I don't need to talk about that. So the idea of United States leadership avoiding conflict and the prospect or the specter of Cold War and so on is a travesty, is preposterous, is a false notion, whatever it is. Fact of the matter, the United States establishment, ever since JFK, yes, that includes LBJ, that includes Nixon. Nixon actually was the first one to begin gutting the United States and sending it to China. They called him opening China up. But if you recall, in the 50s, during the Korean War, the United States forces under MacArthur, nearly, it was like a matter of a week or two, similar to it, invading Iraq, right, arriving at Baghdad. They were not far from Pyongyang. And they were not far from Pyongyang. And the Chinese regime back then sent so many, and then it was like, sent so many conscripts and then cut off the United States forces from behind, which forced MacArthur to start withdrawing because now they're isolated, right? And these Chinese conscripts were shelling the United States soldiers from the hills, surrounding hills, and as they withdrew, and therefore your North Korea debacle now. And yet, the United States now is intentionally gutting the establishment is gutting the United States and making China what it is. China, the Chinese regime now, in all its assets, in all its science, and there's not much science there really, in all the patents that are in everything that it is really a surrogate transfer from the United States and Germany and possibly England and France to them. I call them like this. They are the 2,000-pound slug or leech or parasite stuck on the 200-pound humans. That is United States and Germany and so on. Make no mistake, folks. In the future, I hope it doesn't happen, and I'm thinking it's not going to happen. But in the future, the falsified history will say, oh, the United States, became great and then it faltered on its own because others beat it. No. It's because the establishment in the United States intentionally destroyed, it's imploded the country and made its goodness and wholesomeness available for Chinese regime, Russian regime, and Iran's regime. And these are bloodthirsty regimes. They don't understand what liberty and freedom and democracy is, or well-being of the individual period. So if these tripod of Israel takes over, like full dictatorship of the world, like Middle East, Europe, and Asia, you're gonna begin to realize those fictional novels like 1984 and Brave New World come about. They're in the works now. Now let me tell you about Putin. I said this before, and I will say it again. This is not. This is no longer a sneaking suspicion. This is no longer a possibility. It is a certainty. Putin's intention is to take over Europe. In the least, the areas where the Soviet Union was in Europe, such as the Baltics, such as Eastern Europe, such as the Balkans, such as Eastern Germany, and so on. He has no less, the Putins have no less intentions on Europe. Similar to Iran, have no less intentions on the Middle East and North Africa. Or China, for that matter, have no less intentions on the rest of Asia. Basic and simple, make no mistake. You may think it is the alliance or of interest, people exchanging or regimes exchanging interest. Oh, no. This is more than that, much deeper than that in roots and foundation and dogma and establishment and so on. The Chinese regime and the Russian regime and the Iran regime are receive direct instructions from Israel. And they are, by all means, the surrogates of Israel, as much as the establishment in the United States, the establishment in Germany, and here and there, period. My point to you is very simple, folks. If you are serious about your future, your liberty, your way of thinking, and your society, and what you were for thousands of years, and so on and so forth, now is the time to make sure the Putins never cross Ukraine. Now is the time. Now you may say it's time for a change. This Europe, old Europe, has been around for a long time. It's now to change. The change is not a change for a better life or a higher platform or lifestyle or higher way of thinking. Oh, no. The change is basically animalizing you, you Europeans, especially you Germans. You think that you have been filtered. You think you have been purged in World War I and World War II. Putins have different idea, especially you and Scandinavia and Holland and so on. What happened in World War II, they will do again to you because they still think you're not completely purged or these contaminants, you're not pure in their sense of purity. that is uh, uh, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Peace, basic and simple. People, don't kid yourself about what's happening in this world in the last century and this century. Last century, those tripod of Israel and the other legs that were temporary, such as Nazism and communism, and then that transformed into modern Putinism, have murdered in the past century. I have the number as no less than 500 million innocent people, whether it's in China or in Siberia or in those Stans Republic in Central Asia or Europe for that matter, or the Middle East or South America or so on. So just no Pinochet of Chile and Assad of Syria and Khomeini of Iran and the two brothers and their two brothers, Lenin and Stalin, and now Putin and what's between them, and Erich Honecker and so on, and see what happened. They will do that. But you may say, well, evidence now indicates otherwise, because Russia has actually moved away from total morbid communism, dark communism, and while they insist, the establishment insists on owning authority and rule and so on, but they allow people to, exist and live. The answer is they found out that communism, those Putins found out that morbid communism was never successful, similar to Mongol movement of the Mongols. So they had to change. So what they've done is very simple. Dress it up in a little bit of brighter clothing. And while the iron fist is still there, it's now wearing a glove of velvet, right? But the purpose and the strategy is really to arrive back at that morbid communism, that animal farm, basic and simple. This is not exaggeration, folks. This is not overactive imagination. This is as real as it gets. When the landscape has been totally subjugated and become subject of that tripod of Israel, they will revert back into morbid communism, because that's what they think of you, that's what they learn of you, that's what they understand you to be, and so on and so forth. And these Putins have no mercy, nor will they negotiate, nor will they share, nor will they let you live, nor will they leave you alone, period. Allah is my witness, and I wish you folks fight Russia now. The Middle East was very successful in fighting off this Iran thing, this Iran revolution. But United States and Russia came in to enable them. However, even as we speak, they still having problems, and their rule is basically superficial. And just like the Mongols arrived on the scene and spilled the blood of millions, eventually they dissipated and vanished and receded. So is the modern movement of that tripod of Israel, basic and simple. It'll take a little bit of time, but it will. My dear friends, have a nice day. I wish you luck in fighting this tyranny that is creeping ever so slowly toward your lands in Europe and the Middle East and everywhere else. Bye now.